Welcome to We Chat Divorce, hosted by Karen Shalhoub, Legal Liaison, and Catherine Shanahan, CDFA. Each episode, we sit down with divorce professionals and industry experts to provide insights and frank discussions about real people, real situations, and real divorce to help you achieve your best life post-divorce. This episode of We Chat Divorce is brought to you by My Divorce Solution, offering divorce financial planning so clients can secure the divorce settlement they deserve. Visit mydivorcesolution.com to request access.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to We Chat Divorce, the Divorce Explored series, where we break down the messy, emotional, and often confusing parts of divorce to help you make smart, informed decisions every step of the way. I'm Karen Shalhoub, Legal Liaison and co-founder of My Divorce Solution.
I'm Catherine Shanahan, Divorce Financial Specialist, CDFA, and the other co-founder of My Divorce Solution. We're here to give you the clarity you need so you could take control of your divorce, especially when it comes to your money and your future.
I want to start today with something a client said to us recently. She'd been told by a friend that she should expect about $4,000 a month in alimony. Her sister, who had been through a divorce, told her closer to $6,000. A spousal support calculator she found online gave her yet another number of $5,200. Yet her attorney told her, honestly, that none of those numbers mean anything because no one had actually looked at her husband's full income picture. So she had 4 different answers, and she was about to walk into mediation built on whichever one felt most reassuring. And I'm sure that was the highest possible number that could be obtained. That is the problem we want to talk about today. So for all of you out there, if you've typed "how is alimony calculated" into a Google search, use a spousal support calculator, ask ChatGPT or some other AI, or asked your friends or colleagues who had gone through a divorce what you should expect to pay or receive, you've probably already discovered that you can get an answer very quickly, but getting the right answer is a different conversation entirely. Catherine and I are going to walk through what really goes into evaluating spousal support, why calculators are only a starting point, and why financial clarity before negotiation is the difference between a settlement that holds up and one that falls apart or before it ever gets started. So Catherine, you and I have sat with hundreds, and that's probably a low number of clients on this exact question. A lot of people come to us for inquiry just wanting to know what their alimony number will be. And from your seat, I know this one trips up people constantly, every day.
And it also trips me up when I have conversations with their attorneys. As you know, it's one of the areas that I like least because there's no rhyme or reason for alimony. You know, all attorneys say there's no calculator for alimony. However, you can Google and find alimony calculators. And so it kind of gives you a false hope in some instances where you're thinking you're getting that number, just like the person you spoke about earlier. So you really have to start with the household question. What are your expenses? How have you been living? Because alimony, one of the factors is what is your need and what is the ability of the other party to pay. And the only way you know that is what cash is coming in and what cash is going out, as it has been during your marriage. And so there's a lot of things that people don't know about their expenses. So it's hard to figure out what your need actually is. So, you know, I know we do that tedious work with them. But you really have to be able to defend what your need is. That's probably the most important thing. So when you hear what your friend's receiving or your sister received or anyone else other than yourself, you can't rely on that. Just because they look at you and they say, oh, you know, you have nicer cars or you have a bigger house, you'll probably get much more than I would get. That's not necessarily true. You may be overspending. Their amount could have been miscalculated. So for us, we start with that income and expenses so we can set you up for what your need actually is.
And that makes perfect sense. And the need actually starts with understanding how the courts interpret your expenses. Because I often say right out of the gate, how you and your spouse manage your household is reframed completely in the divorce environment. And understanding that, then how that translates to need is a very important exercise.
And
So
Karen, even with
yeah,
need though, you know, I try to say when we're going through the process, even though your need is there, it doesn't mean you're getting that number for your support calculation. I mean, for your support. Um, that's just the number. The other side will tear apart those numbers, and that's why you have to be able to defend them,
mhm.
or accurately tell where you received that number from. But don't think that just because you have a high budget, your spouse has to pay that in alimony or spousal support.
Yeah, it may or it may not be true. And so people get ahead of themselves. We see that all the time. They just want the number without going through the exercise. And sometimes the exercise can take a month or so before you get it all put together. And look, we get it. Divorce is financially terrifying. People want to know, will I be able to keep my home, pay my bills, support my children, retire? But honestly, that is not the best first question. The better first question is, what financial information do I need before this conversation can happen at all? Because without the basic information and going through the exercise of understanding how your expenses are interpreted in the court process, the alimony conversation gets emotional very fast. Because you may say, well, I need this much to live. And your spouse may say, well, I can't afford that. That happens most of the time. And both of you are usually telling the truth from where you're sitting. The problem is you're looking at fragments of a financial picture that just hasn't been put together yet.
Yeah, you can't do this based on your emotions. And believe me, I've never seen anyone who said they thought their alimony number was fair, whatever they got at the end. And
Mm-hmm.
even the paying party doesn't think it's fair. But you want to make sure you're answering your support number based on questions. Do you have all the information that you need? Like, what is the actual income of both parties? It's not necessarily what's on the W-2. There's bonuses, commissions, K-1 income, distributions, equity compensation, passive income. Passive income is a big one. If you're receiving a large estate, that estate can generate, whether it does or not, passive income. That income is available for support. So you have to consider that when you're doing your negotiations. What does it really cost to run your household, including expenses funded with debt or distributions from savings or family help? A lot of people own their own business and pay a lot of household expenses through the business. So that needs to be considered and accounted for. What assets exist? Which ones will provide you passive income, which ones won't? What debt exists? Who's going to pay that debt after divorce? Is that an expense to you or not? It just depends on how you divide your assets and debts. So there's a lot of things to consider when considering alimony.
For sure. And then you layer on that every state and some counties within the states handle alimony, spousal support, spousal maintenance very differently. And your attorney is the right person to explain what your state does. And it's important for us when you have an attorney that we get on a call with them so we can understand their approach, their relationship with the judge. So when we're helping you financially, we can support that strategy because we're not lawyers. We don't give legal advice. But financially speaking, certain factors do come up almost everywhere when support's being evaluated. Some of the factors are the length of the marriage, your individual income, which is rarely as simple as a paycheck, as Catherine explained. And, you know, sometimes when you have been at home or working part-time, even if it was a family decision, maybe the courts will assign an income to you or you and your spouse. The marital lifestyle, meaning what it actually costs to live the life you're living according to the court's interpretation, and the need of the spouse asking for support, the ability of the other spouse to pay, earning capacity, that's what I was saying, the income that may be assigned to you, and the way assets and debts are being divided, because property division and support are very deeply connected. That one is one that people can miss fairly often.
Mm-hmm. It's also the age of both parties. What's the health of both parties? So there's 14 to 20 factors that go into determining alimony, spousal support, or maintenance, whatever your state calls it. It's all the same thing, but called different in every state. You know, that's another really touchy subject when we talk about the spouse saying, you know, those aren't your expenses, or they're telling you we have to downsize the house before we get divorced. They try to make all these changes. So it's really good for you to go through this exercise, because the first thing that happens when you go to an attorney is they give you those financial forms and say, fill them out for your affidavit. And it is income and expenses. And you can very easily write the wrong number down. That will get submitted to the court. And we have seen that time and time again. So Karen, talk a little bit about some common mistakes people put on those affidavits, because I know you work heavily in that area.
Yeah. Well, number one is writing down income numbers that have not been verified, but what you think it is. Other things are putting down expenses that in a line item that should be categorized in another line item, because when the courts look at these expenses, some of them they won't accept as readily in one, like a medical expense holds more weight than, you know, your dermatology appointments that you may not qualify as a medical expense. So there's all kinds of variables and nuances within that we want to clarify with you. So when our clients come in and give us their expenses, we go through line by line and help you understand the importance of those numbers. And often, probably 80% of the time, people completely miss expenses that are very attributable to their household. So those are the things that you need to be able to know and defend. And sometimes some of our clients will focus too much on a spreadsheet and getting right down to the last dollar and almost assuming, or like, let's just say groceries, right? Groceries are one that everyone has to account for. So you take your grocery money over the last year. Well, your financial affidavit is what you would spend on yours. You know, you don't just split it in half, because I say everyone needs the same bottle of ketchup, right? Mm-hmm. So those are very important expenses that you need to qualify accurately for yourself, but you also need to know how to talk about it to your attorney and or to the court if you're going to court, so that it holds weight when you're talking about it, because you can easily be dismissed. Catherine, how many times have we been on a call with a client when the attorney says, slash this, the court's never going to accept that. And it's because our client in that moment wasn't able to confidently defend that number. So then the attorney in turn is going to slash it because they don't want to be in a situation where neither themselves or their clients can defend a number.
Yeah. And it also goes on the income side. You know, you mentioned the stay-at-home mom or dad who gave up a career. You know, you want to be able to say, yes, I was a nurse and I'll be a nurse again, and feel good about yourself, and nurses are making X amount of dollars. Well, that's not the reality. You don't have that nursing job. You don't really know. So don't feel bad about yourself because you postpone a career, and don't commit to an income that you're not receiving. They may impute a number on you, but you have to be realistic. You've been out of the workforce for how long? Really look at what you would be able to achieve, and then put that number in. And your spouse may be saying to you, you were a nurse, you were earning $100,000. You could do that again. That's the number I want used. So there are ways to determine what your actual income should be imputed. Don't just put a number down there to either make yourself better or because somebody else told you to put it there.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, because I see a lot of this as well when you are either an independent contractor or you have your own business and you put down the wrong income number. We had a client just recently come in where she had to pay support to her spouse because she put the wrong number down, meaning she put her gross revenue down as her income. That's not your income if you're self-employed or if you're a 1099 contractor. And so we asked the attorney, how did this happen? He said, well, that's the number that was given to me, and that's the number I used to negotiate support.
And
It
it's
was
not that your
grossly inaccurate.
sorry, yeah, it
Yeah,
was,
go ahead.
but it's not your net number either that you do on your
Right.
tax returns, because there are add backs. So you
Mhm.
have to know which of these deductions would be added back to that net to get you the true number. So you really have to do some diligence here, to make sure that you don't trap yourself. And it's not just one client. We've had this happen several times,
Oh,
actually.
yeah, of course. Yeah. And then misreporting your spouse's income too, which sets the whole talk about conflict. Like, yeah, you need to walk in with your eyes wide open for sure.
Especially because alimony is not a justice. This is not where you're getting justice. And we're seeing the trend move away from alimony in every state. They're getting a little bit more strict. Your best chances of getting alimony, the number that you want, is in mediation, because you can go off of any guideline in mediation, and sometimes people just want to settle, so they'll agree to certain terms. But you have to know your position and be able to support the numbers. That's the key to this whole conversation today. Be able to document actually what you need and what's available. If there's no income available, there's no income available. So we have to be able to really hone in on your spouse's income and your income and even your potential income.
Yeah. And you have to be very careful, Catherine. We see this a lot too, when your spouse, if they're the main wage earner, or even if not, paying certain expenses, even if you make an agreement, that can be really hard to unwind if you're setting precedents that your need is not what monies would otherwise be available to you. And we see this happen over and over and over again. And to unwind that is really difficult and expensive to do. Mm-hmm. So let's move on to support calculators. Everybody Googles those up. They're one of the most searched tools online, along with ChatGPT, AI. And they're not useless. They can be a starting point for orienting yourself, but they're not an answer for all the reasons we've already talked about. It doesn't verify your documents. It does not review your bank statements. It does not know whether the budget you typed in is realistic. It does not know whether your spouse's income is stable, variable, commission-based, stock options, K1s, investment income. It does not know whether bonuses are guaranteed. It doesn't know if your spouse's stock options are actually liquid. It doesn't know whether income should be imputed because someone is voluntarily unemployed. And most importantly, it does not tell you whether the number it produces is sustainable. So when someone says, I use a calculator and this is what I should get, or this is the most I should have to pay, that's only a starting point for conversation. And it's a good starting point. It's just not the strategy or the approach.
Yes, be prepared for your attorney to say, we're not using that. Or, you'll never get that, because it doesn't consider how your county looks at alimony, even in your state. As Karen mentioned earlier, even within the states, different counties look at support differently. So again, the strategy is to get the information together, bring the accurate information to your attorney, and then find out what the strategy would be. Don't just Google and expect that. And even when we do the support calculations with our clients, I'm always one to give the best case, worst case, the highest, the lowest. But I always like to confirm it if they have an attorney. But I always want them to know that it's probably going to lean towards the worst case, because that's generally how it works out with support, especially if you're getting other assets. But if you're prepared and you see that the numbers don't add up, because a big reality is, you're driving a nice car, you're living a nice lifestyle, you have these expenses, and you really never paid attention to how it's being paid. Now all of a sudden you realize that your cash flow isn't really what it was. Maybe you were living on credit cards, maybe you were living off the business income, maybe you were living on that one time a year bonus that you received. That does not carry forward post divorce. So the cash flow is going to be very different when we're calculating support. So that's why your need has to be looked at differently as well. What is your actual need? And then what is the ability of the other party to pay? Because so many people are shocked that actually everything coming in was going out, that they were really challenged with keeping up with their spending. So you need that reality check as well.
Yeah, for sure. And you may have found on your introductory call with your attorney that you talked through these issues and you felt fairly confident that you would know the answer. But then you could be months into it and no one will give you a straight answer. Everybody wants to dodge this question. You've probably heard it depends more than you can count. So I'm going to talk about a story that kind of helps you understand how this could play out. So we had a client come to us. She felt reasonably confident about most of the marital estate. She was involved. She was partial business owner. She knew about the house, the retirement accounts. She had a general sense of the asset division. And there's a business her husband owned, and she's been told what it's worth. So she was adamant. The only thing I really need help with is spousal support. Just tell me what number I need help. My attorney won't help me. This is what I need help with. So the conversation ensues and the picture changes because what showed up was the business produces W-2 income for one of the spouses, but that's only part of the story. Distributions running through the personal accounts have funded a meaningful piece of the household. They do not show up on the W-2. They appear on the K-1 and the cash flow. The business itself was funded years ago with both parties' retirement money. Now that makes a difference. That raises valuation and marital property questions. A buyout for her interest in the business may be on the table, looks fine on paper, but when we model the cash flow, it requires money to be pulled from the business more than the business has historically distributed. There were inherited interests, trust income, phantom stock. No one had fully mapped those out. So now you know why the attorney was consistently dodging, and a year later, what alimony can I expect? So she came in asking one question, what's my support number? It sounds simple, right? Someone just do the calculation for me. But what we have to actually figure out is multiple other questions. And until those questions are answered, no one can responsibly put a support number on the table, even if mediation is 2 weeks away. And if you do, you're negotiating from assumptions, not facts.
And Karen, and all of that you just said, when getting the facts, it may be that you uncover other assets. So that's why you don't just settle on an alimony number. You get the information to see that everything has been disclosed. And then you have a realistic look at what your life might look like moving forward with cash flow and assets and debts.
Yeah. Once right along with how much am I going to get? How long is it going to last? And again, you're going to hear it depends. Of course, it varies by state. As Catherine said, states are kind of locking in on spousal support, especially in very certain specific states. So, that's why your attorney needs to be very confident advocating for you. It depends on state law, the length of the marriage, the type of support being considered, the needs of the receiving spouse. And so we're going to reiterate, your attorney is the right person to walk you through those variables from a legal perspective. But financially, the more useful question is not how long does it last? It's what happens when it ends.
Yeah. There's a couple of points there. So when we do know how long it would last and what an expected amount is, we can calculate a alimony buyout. Some people choose to do an alimony buyout where you get a lump sum or you get an unequal division of the assets to cover alimony. There's a lot of pros and cons for both parties, but it is something to consider. But even in doing that, if you get a lump sum alimony, you have to manage that money because will you be going back to work? Do you need training or education to complete? Will you be selling your house? Will assets need to be drawn down to supplement any income? Will you even qualify to refinance on your own? On the paying side, the obligation due over that period of time, can they meet their own expenses? Can they save for retirement? Can they manage the debt they took on in the settlement? You might be the paying side. So really, there are a lot of things to consider here, which is what we're pointing out. But the modeling is what matters most. A 5-year support number can feel like a long time on paper, but believe me, 5 years goes by in the blink of an eye. So when you projected both households out month by month, year by year, you start to see the cliffs and the gaps no one talked about in negotiations, because you're just ready to get through with it and you're hoping you get something. So you really do have to plan when you do get that final number.
Yeah. And the interplay of child support, and if child support would be ending during the spousal support, would there be modifications? That gets missed a lot. That specific discussion gets missed. So let's move into negotiating spousal support let me just say, negotiating spousal support in isolation. You feel like you have a pretty good number. You feel like you know what you want per month, or the payer says, I will only pay this much per month, without seeing or understanding how that number sits inside the rest of the settlement. And the result is settlements that look fine on paper and fall apart in practice. So someone agrees to lower support in exchange for keeping the house, and 6 months later, they can't afford the house. Someone takes a lump sum alimony buyout that looks like a big number and discovers it actually doesn't replace the monthly income they gave up. So none of these outcomes are about support numbers being right or wrong. They're about the support number being decided in isolation, as I said, from everything else.
A lot of people try to do that because it's an easier fix if you just accept a number that sounds good, looks good, feels good. But
it's a relief point, right?
Mm-hmm. Because everyone's agreeing for assets and debts when we acknowledge all of them. When everyone is aware of what it is, if they're doing 50-50, okay, great. It's 50-50. Maybe we have to true up some assets if somebody wants to keep more of something than the other. And everything seems fine. But as soon as the alimony conversation and the child support conversation begins, antennas go up, hairs on your back go up. Oh, well, I shouldn't say that. That sounds disgusting. But but you get so worked up. Both parties get so worked up. So a lot of times the payer wants to commit to an alimony number first, because if the payer's happy, then they're going to feel really confident moving through the rest of it. The receiving party doesn't want to know the alimony number first, or maybe they do because they want to keep the house. So when you're exploring those numbers, or you're talking about the range of what a support number can be, use the middle of the road there if you need to determine whether you can keep the house or not. Or use the low end of a number to determine if you can keep the house, because of course on the high end, if you can keep it on the low end, obviously you can keep it on the high end. But you should be looking at the worst case of scenario with a support number, just so you're not blindsided.
Yeah. And in most cases, not all cases, there's always exceptions. Trying to obtain temporary support is a really good place, because it's temporary. It's modeled through what actually will be, converted over to permanent if it works out. So, really think through, if someone's just paying the expenses, or you all are paying the expenses, as you always have, that could work for you or that could work against you. And you should know those variables as well. So if you're headed into a support conversations, again, you're going to hear us say this every day: the documents matter. The data and documents matter. And of course, we could give you a list of 30 or more. But if you only had time to focus on a handful, Catherine, can you just talk about where to start?
Yeah, let's see if I can recall a few things. So you should get 3 years of personal tax returns with all schedules and K-1s. 3 years basically tells you whether income is stable, if it's growing, if it's volatile. The schedules tell you what is hiding behind the headline, the 1040 number. Number 2, I would go for 12 months of bank and credit card statements. This is where the truth about lifestyle lies, right? It's really hard to recall what you spend and when you spend it. But when you look at 12 months of bank and credit card statements, you can basically go in and highlight with whatever color you like anything that was your personal expense. That's an easy way to track your own spending. The third I would say is pay stubs and bonus history for both spouses. Pay stubs show year to date in a way, tax returns do not, but you also want the W-2 with the pay stubs. And if you can only get one, get the year-end pay statement that sums up the whole year. Number 4, if a business is involved, you want business tax returns. You want profit and loss statements and documentation around any distributions, retained earnings, and owner compensation. This is a lot where the complicated income comes into place that you really need to consider. And then lastly, I would say, and although it's not lastly, but lastly for today, is current statements for every account. You want retirement accounts, investment accounts. You want your mortgage statement, which is any loans. If you have it, you might have 2 mortgages, or you might have loans, personal loans. Any equity compensation, that's a big one. You want the equity compensation package. You want to know the details to that. You just don't want a spreadsheet that your spouse does for you. You want actually the company document. You cannot model what you cannot see. So without at least these 5 things that we're talking about, you're negotiating from a memory. And with those things that we mentioned, you can usually start asking the right questions and resolve to what you need.
Really envision what that means to you moving forward versus just hoping for a number that you don't know is right or wrong. Now I want to move into something that is near and dear to my heart every day because I hear it, drives me crazy. A word about AI calculators and online answers. Look, we're all using it. You can ask ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, how is alimony calculated in my state? You can give it the numbers that you know best, and you can get a pretty thorough sounding answer in 10 seconds. But for all the reasons we just talked about, you could just be horribly mistaken. So,
well, if you don't know the information, how will you know what to ask these things?
Exactly.
Right? So just sit back and think, do I have everything that Catherine and Karen said today? Do I have all that information? Am I clear on that? If you don't, you can't ask a robot to answer something because you're not asking it the right question.
Yeah. Well, you just sum that up in a couple sentences because that is exactly right. The AI or online response can only be as good as the data you give it. And it's not asking for verified documents. It's not asking to look at certain things. And even if it did, it still wouldn't be able to give you the response that is most complete and accurate because information is not analysis. A calculator output is not verified data. A general answer is not a strategy. So use the tools to learn the vocabulary. That's great. Absolutely. Then bring the real documents to a real professional and figure out what it means to you and your family. So this is what we do at My Divorce Solution, and it's worth being clear about it. We're not attorneys again, and we do not give legal advice, but we do help you break down these issues in a way that you can make very informed, intentioned decisions for yourself and your family moving forward. We model what different settlement scenarios will look like before signing anything. We map income, all of it, not just the W-2 or maybe not even what you know. Many times we're unpacking more cash flow than you even realize exists. And we call that complete picture, the MDS financial portrait. It is the document supported financial roadmap that lets you, your attorneys, mediators have a more productive conversation because everyone then is working from the same verified information.
And most importantly, financial clarity helps everyone in the room. It helps you, to me, most importantly, understand what you actually need versus what you think you need. And also what they think you need, right? So when you can defend these numbers yourself or you have the financial clarity, you can have a powerful conversation. It also will help your attorney advocate for you because you're coming from a position of evidence and that's what they need to work off of, right? Not your emotions or your assumptions. And it will help a mediator see where the real pressure points are. So it reduces all guesswork and it really surfaces problems before the settlement is signed instead of 6 months after. But most importantly, as we always say, it lets you make decisions based on what is true rather than what you are afraid of, which actually is very easy to do in divorce. It's a scary thing for both the paying spouse and both the receiving spouse of support.
Absolutely. We get it. We've been there. So if you're listening to this and divorce may be somewhere in your future, or it is somewhere in your future, the most useful thing you can do this week is to start gathering documents quietly, calmly into one folder. The 5 categories that Catherine just walked us through. That's it. You don't have to analyze anything right now. One of the most important things we try to reiterate is just take one step at a time. Try not to get ahead of yourself, as everybody does. We all do it, but just remind yourself, I just need to take one step at a time. You don't have to make decisions. You just have to make sure that when the time comes for whenever you're ready to make decision, that the information exists. The single most expensive thing in divorce is making decisions without information. You've spent all this money, you're 2 weeks before mediation, and your attorney still says it depends. Having the information and data is the single most empowering thing. Having it ready before you need it. So if you came to this episode asking, how is alimony calculated? Here's what we want you to walk away with. It's not a formula. It's formulaic, but it's not a formula. It is not a calculator output. It's not what your friend got. It's not what the internet told you. It's a financial analysis that lives at the intersection of income, expenses, lifestyle, asset division, debt, liquidity, earning capacity, tax impact, and the actual ability of 2 separate households to function after divorce. So before you negotiate support, agree to a buyout, waive anything, or accept a number that someone else put in front of you that you may or may not understand, you need to understand the numbers behind the number.
And you have to ask yourself some questions and be realistic. Can the receiving spouse actually live on the amount? Can the paying spouse actually afford it? Those are the 2 biggest factors. What happens when it ends? How does it interact with the property division? What assumptions are baked into it? What documents support those assumptions? And what changes if income changes? If you can answer those, you're negotiating with clarity. If you cannot, you're negotiating with hope.
And that's exactly why we do this work. We help you move from fear and scattered information to clear financial picture. The MDS financial portrait is how we get there. Organized, income, expenses, asset, debts, and settlement scenarios, so that you can have the best conversations with your legal team, your mediator, and your financial advisors. If you're preparing for divorce and trying to make sense of it all, visit mydivorcesolution.com to learn more about how we can help you understand the financial impact of divorce decisions before you make them. We'll see you next time on Divorce Explored.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of We Chat Divorce. We hope this episode was informative and supportive on your divorce journey. If you're looking for more support for navigating divorce with confidence and clarity, head over to mydivorcesolution.com for more podcast episodes, divorce events, and resources for your divorce. We'll see you back here for our next episode.